Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on climate change and opportunities for roots and tubers. In the coming half an hour, we'll have a little question and answer session and debate about this topic. Of course, the topic of climate change itself is very broad and has multiple angles to it. And of course, the roots and tuber crops, from the literature, we know that some of them may be better adapted, some may be less adapted to climate change, but definitely the whole climate change scenario and how it's going to impact on roots and tubers will have a huge footprint on funding and the efforts of science and investment for the coming decades. Of course, part of that is related to trends that are following climate change, temperature changes, changes in heat or drought, and that's something that different people are looking at. Entomologists, people looking at diseases, how the agroecologies will change, how the incidents will change, but of course also for breeders working on climate smart traits, heat tolerance, drought tolerance, it's an important topic. And not to forget that of course often one thing we mention about roots and tuber crops, that they are excellent resilience crops. I think sweet potato is a well-known example. After typhoons and after extreme events, we often claim that our roots and tuber crops are better fitted to fill in those gaps that surge right after a shock than compared to other crops. So plenty to talk about and plenty to kind of fuel the debate. But first, I want to introduce our speakers. We have here GrahamThiele, of course, the director of the CGIAR research program on roots, tubers, and bananas. We are still expecting Claude Fauquet, who is the director of the Global Cassava Partnership for the 21st Century. We have Chris Wijkhuis, who's a senior entomologist with CIHAT, based in Hanoi. And we have Lawrence Kent, who's a senior program advisor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So let me start off with the first question for Graham. Graham, what are the key challenges ahead for roots and tuber crops?
Okay, well, I'd like to take the big picture, the big vision of what we need to think about. And I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 different areas. First of all, I think we need to get better foresight. We need to understand what change is happening. We need to do some modeling to understand the details of that change, the way in which pests and diseases, for example, play through. And we need to translate that into some metrics. Is that a better mic? We need to translate that into some metrics that we can use to guide our breeding programs and other technological research. Secondly, if we're going to approach climate change, we'll need to be working in a much more teamed up way. If everybody does their own thing, this isn't going to work. So we need to get on the same page amongst different players. And part of the solution there is that having shared models about what we think might happen. The third thing I like to think about very quickly is to expect the unexpected. We need to think beyond just the trends and think, well, out of the box a bit, what are the other kinds of changes which might happen, which might impact onto roots and tubers? So thinking out the box. And the fourth thing is that it's not just trends. It's the increased importance of extreme events that may have many implications for roots and tubers. So let me begin with the first one. There's a lot of work going on climate change models. There's a large amount of uncertainty in those models, but we need to manage that uncertainty and we need to think through what does the world look like in 50, 30, 100 years' time. And we need to link that through to understanding currently what are the potential changes using models and others to go beyond just thinking about rainfall and heat changes to think through to pests and diseases, because many of those are going to also be climate driven. So we need downscale models, we need foresight, and we need to be able to link those models to guidance to researchers of what they should actually be doing. So if we do that right, there's a huge opportunity to do some of our current research even better, but we need that foresight in place. And the second point is teaming up. If everybody does their own thing and does it separately, we're not going to get very far. So we need to make use of spaces like the GCB21, like the ISTC, like this meeting, and like the Roots and Tubers and Bananas program as spaces to bring together partners to think through this together. because each of us got a role to play. We have to have the farmers on board, we have to have the researchers on board, the policymakers, so we need these spaces to bring people together, and the models of what's going to change can be an important catalyst to help get people onto the same page. And the third thing I'd like to talk about very briefly is let's try and think out the box. Some of the expected changes we've already figured through. We know the world's going to get hotter, some places get wetter, some places get drier. We know that's going to affect breeding, and we know something about pests and diseases, but maybe there's other changes. So I quite like the presentation yesterday from Andrew Westby of NRI, who started thinking about post-harvest. Well, it isn't just about pests and diseases. If it's raining more, there's going to be all sorts of issues about drying technology. If there's more extreme events, we're going to have higher rainfall. What does that mean for let's say, sun drying of different roots and tubers? So there's many other things that we haven't really thought through very well. The world's going to get hotter. Well, okay, maybe the cassava does a bit better, but what about the people growing that cassava? We know that when it gets hotter, that's tougher for farmers to be coping with. So we've got to be thinking about these other changes. And then the next thing I was thinking about is a little bit, we're good on the trends, but we're going to get more extreme events. We're going to get more high rainfall events. What does that mean for our technologies? It may mean that crops on hillsides are more vulnerable to erosion. So those extreme events also have implications, and it's not just the trends. So I think the big picture, we've got to put all these things together. Think about the modeling, think about the foresight, think about some specific targets for what we want to do, and create spaces to bring everybody together, but also think about the extreme events and think outside the box. If we can do all of those things, there's some chance that we will make some progress in tackling climate change.
Okay, thank you, Graham. That was a very, very rich response.